Hello, welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. My guest today is a VIP in the world of menopause, and I'm slightly starstruck and very happy to welcome Diane Danzebrink to the podcast. Hello and welcome.
Hi, Emma. Thank you for inviting me.
So, you're a campaigner and founder of the non-profit organisation Menopause Support, and your main campaign is Make Menopause Matter, which I imagine most of our listeners will have heard of. But for people who perhaps haven't kind of come across you or don't know what menopause support is about, can you talk about the three aims of the campaign, and a bit more about what menopause support does, what it offers?
Yeah, absolutely lovely. So, sort of how it all came about is really probably similar to many people who are driven by a passion to make change, is my own personal experience.
Mm.
So, my own experience of menopause was pretty grim, to be honest. I had surgical menopause back in 2012, so quite a long time ago now. And unfortunately, I didn't have the right information or guidance prior to my surgery or after it. So,
So you had no
no,
idea what to expect at
no,
all.
so nobody, I knew that, kind of, I knew I wouldn't have periods anymore, but I didn't know that there were 30 plus symptoms of menopause. Nobody explained to me how different surgical menopause is to a natural menopause.
Mm.
Nobody explained to me how vital it was for somebody in early menopause. So I was only 45 at the time, to have hormone replacement therapy. And unfortunately, what I found out to my cost is that the symptoms I knew nothing about, which were the mental health symptoms, the things like anxiety. For me, I started having panic attacks,
Mm.
absolutely crushing anxiety, completely destroyed my self confidence completely and totally. And over a period of weeks and months after my surgery, I became an absolute husk of the person that I used to be. Cutting a long story short, unfortunately for me, it took me to a point in my life where I came very close to ending it.
Mm.
And it was at that point that I was incredibly fortunate to have a supportive husband who basically took over and demanded help from our GP practice. And I was very fortunate to see a GP who recognized exactly what was going on for me, took the time to explain to me that I had completely run out of estrogen and how important estrogen is for brain function, and why I was feeling like I was feeling, and how she could help me with that was to offer me hormone replacement therapy. Now, I was quite scared of that because I'd heard all the
Mm.
scary stuff about it over the past 20 years. But she explained that things were very different now, that we had what's referred to as body identical hormone replacement therapy, that it wasn't all oral tablets, that for me, I only needed estrogen. Well, she said I only needed estrogen. As it turned out, it was more complex than that, but we won't go into that now. But that I could have that via my skin rather than as an oral tablet. She talked to me about all the risks and benefits, and I started it the same day. And I'm always a little bit cautious when I talk about how much improvement I felt, how quickly, because I really could not have got any lower than
No.
I already
And
was.
everyone's experience is different and everyone reacts differently. So you can't go by kind of somebody else's
No,
individual story anyway.
absolutely not, lovely. And I think so for me, because I was so low,
Mm.
any improvement was something that gave me hope. And over the next couple of weeks, I did start to feel better, which did give me some hope for the future because I had felt completely hopeless. And initially, it was relief, but then I just felt really angry
Yeah.
because I thought, look how close I came to not being here.
Could have been very different.
And I wonder how many other people have experienced something similar, or how many other people out there just feel like they're going mad, which is exactly what I felt. So I started to research, and that's essentially over a long period of time. It didn't happen overnight, but that's essentially how menopause support came about, because I started to realize that there were far too many people out there suffering in silence. And
Mm.
I just remember turning around to my husband one day and saying, if I ever feel like me again, I'm going to make damn sure I do something to change this.
And you have a medical background.
So I have therapist by profession,
Mhm.
but I also have I have professional nurse training in menopause too.
Right. Okay.
So it's essentially what I started to do initially was literally to offer support to women one to one at a time. But it became very clear very quickly that the need was absolutely overwhelming. So I started menopause support on my kitchen table, which was just me creating a very, very basic website, sharing my story, and then as much factual, evidence based information that I could get my hands on. Um, and then I decided to start a community group online that now supports just over 25,000 women. I'm delighted to say that there's a team now that look after that group. It's
I
not
know,
just me.
fantastic. And that's on Facebook if people are
It
looking
is,
for it.
yes.
Yeah.
So we still offer these one-to-one menopause sessions, which essentially is sort of 45 minutes where somebody can either talk to myself or my colleague Steph, who is a nurse by background, also has professional nurse training in menopause. And essentially, our job is to listen. Our job is to listen to what people are going through, because very often a GP doesn't have the luxury of time
No, 10
to be able
minutes
to
and
do
you're in
that.
and you're
Yep.
out.
Yep. So we have the time to be able to listen. We then also have the knowledge to be able to talk individuals through what their potential options are for managing their menopause. And if they want us to, we will then write an introductory letter for their GP. Because very often, if people are not feeling their usual selves, they're not feeling so confident, etc., actually having that supportive
Mm.
conversation and having that letter to share with the doctor makes a big
So they
difference.
can advocate for themselves.
Exactly, lovely. Yeah. So we also offer educational awareness training to businesses and organizations. And as you said, we're a not for profit organization. So essentially, we are tiny. You know, there's three of us that work within the organization. We have 4 volunteers, but we have an enormous impact. And that's the point really, is the campaign, which is so Menopause Support is the home of the Make Menopause Matter campaign. The campaign I launched in Parliament in October 2018, and I launched it with three very clear aims. The first is to have mandatory training for all our GPs in menopause. The second is to have menopause guidance in every workplace. And the third is to have menopause included in the RSE curriculum in schools. Delighted to tell you that in July 2019, that was approved for England, and it actually went on to the curriculum in September 2020. But it's not going to happen overnight.
Mm.
These things take time. So it will take time to embed into the curriculum. But we also want to see that for the rest of the UK. And for me, I would like to see it for the rest of the world too, because teaching young people about menopause is an absolute no brainer. It's a complete win-win situation because they will take that information with them throughout the rest of their lives, whether it affects them personally, to their partner, to a family member, or to a colleague. And if we all have that information as young people, then hopefully that allows us to be more compassionate and supportive as we go throughout our lives.
Absolutely. And you had some a recent success as well around prescription charges. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that actually that's not our success. That's a combination of everybody who has sort of raised awareness and campaigned, but that was driven by an MP called Carolyn Harris.
Mhm.
So I've met with Carolyn several times over the past few years. And earlier this year, she launched the Menopause Support and Services Bill in Parliament.
Right.
And there was an APPG, which is an all party parliamentary group, which myself and many others gave evidence to. And they were set up really to look at menopause, healthcare, menopause in the workplace, etc. But it became clear for Carolyn that probably the first thing that she could address within Parliament was the changes to prescription charges.
Mhm.
So, what she actually lobbied for was free HRT for everybody in England. When it came to the debate, what the government agreed to was, rather than for it to be free, they agreed that there would be a single charge annually. So that hasn't started yet. It probably won't actually come into force until sometime next year. But from next year, there will be a single annual charge for HRT. So for some people, they pay for it monthly.
Mhm.
For others, they pay for it quarterly.
So it could be a substantial
Yeah,
yeah, reduction in the amount
exactly.
that they
You'll
pay
only
across the year.
pay once in future. Yeah.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, it would be even more amazing if it was free, obviously. Do you think that they'll be continuing to push that still further, or
I don't know because, I mean, it was a step in the right direction, but I think the bigger achievement that came out of the work that was done over this year is that the government have now agreed to set up a menopause task force. That's going to be co-chaired by Carolyn and an MP who is also a minister in the Department of Health called Maria Caulfield.
Mhm.
So they're going to be co-chairing that. We are very much hoping, Menopause Support, very much hoping to be part of that. And I think that's sort of the bigger achievement, is getting the sort of current sitting government to say, okay, we recognize that this is an area that really does need to be focused on, and we're actually going to have a proper task force that looks solely at menopause care and menopause in the workplace and menopause education. So we're definitely moving the right
There has
way.
been a huge sea change. It seems over the
Yeah.
last 12 months, even in the time since I sort of set up and launched the podcast, just in terms of, well, so many areas, just in terms of general awareness. There was obviously
Mm,
the Channel 4 documentary
mhm.
recently. Obviously the fact that is being, discussed at the sort of in government, more and more books coming out every month, it seems, on this topic. So there's definitely a lot more kind of buzz, and hopefully sort of reduction in the sort of the stigma and taboo around this. And as you say, I think having that built into the curriculum, having that sort of normalized, all those little bits kind of start building and building, don't they? And then, we're having more and more conversations, maybe with our friends, as a result of the sort of the documentary, or as a result of the books that people have read. And
Yeah, I mean, things have changed hugely since I first spoke out about this publicly, which was towards the end of 2015. That was a really lonely place at the time because people just didn't want to say the word menopause out loud. And for the first couple of years, sort of it was quite a lonely place. But certainly over the last, I would say, sort of the last 2 or 3 years, things have changed quite significantly. There's
mm,
much more media interest. As you say, I think social media has played a huge part in the sharing of information, in community building, in people not feeling so isolated and
mm,
alone. And social media can certainly have its downsides, But I think this is definitely one of the positives, is sort of sharing that information, is empowering people to actually make some informed decisions for themselves. But campaigning for change on anything, I always say to people, you have to remember it's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time. You've got to be in it for the long haul. So
Yeah.
every step forward is, sort of a step in the right direction, but we've still got a long way to go.
What do you think kind of kept you going in those early days? You were saying, it was quite a lonely place, feeling that sometimes you were probably knocking against a closed door.
Mm.
What sort of kept you at it?
I think because from the very first time that I spoke about it on TV, literally from then, my inbox sort of just never stopped filling up
Mm,
with just heartbreaking experiences of people, problems with relationships, problems in the workplace, struggling with their mental health, struggling with their physical health. So the more I spoke about it, the more people kind of came out of the woodwork. And that just made me more and more frustrated, knowing just how many were struggling, and then sort of starting to speak to others who were willing to raise their voice on this, and knowing that they were experiencing similar things with their inboxes being full, etc. And to be honest, the campaign the campaign was exactly a result of that email experience. So I was
mm.
sitting at my desk one evening, I was just about to kind of, sort of sign off for the day, and another email popped into my inbox, and it just the experience of this particular individual just made me so angry, and I just thought, nope, that's it, we need a campaign. And I sat there that evening and I wrote the change campaign petition. I didn't take any advice. I didn't run it past anybody.
It's like, I'm on fire.
I probably did it all wrong, but I just thought, no, this cannot be allowed to go on. And I just pressed the sort of send button and thought, do you know what? If a few thousand people sign this, that will be amazing. And I think we're heading towards 170,000 signatures at the moment. And as I say, we've achieved having menopause included in the curriculum in England, which is, in campaigning terms, absolutely amazing in what has been really a short space of
Mm,
time.
it is incredible. So do you have sort of a sort of particular goal in mind for 2022?
So for us, so at Menopause Support, we have a project that I probably shouldn't have even said we have a project, because I can't really tell you anything about it. But we have a project that we're working on that we're very excited about for next year. And in campaigning terms, as I say, we will certainly be looking to have involvement in this task force. I've actually already been in touch with the minister about this task force, because I think what menopause support does is, because we are completely independent of any other organization, we are completely independent of any doctor. Essentially, we are a patient advocacy
Mm,
organization. So we do get to bring the patient voice. And I think that's really important. That really has to be front and center in all of these discussions and conversations on how menopause care needs to be improved, how menopause in the workplace needs to be supported. I think it absolutely has to be bringing forward the voices of those who maybe don't feel that they can raise their own publicly. And of course, we have to remember that there are those who perhaps would not feel in a position to be able to raise their voice. So I think we have to ensure good menopause care for the future for everybody. and support in the workplace for everybody, not just those who, like me, have
Mm.
been driven to raise their voice. We have to remember that there's a lot of people that we are essentially representing, we're speaking on behalf of. So the campaign is absolutely sort of at the heart of everything that we do.
If we sort of looked forward 5 years into the future, what would your ideal state be? Where would we be?
5 years into the future, I would love to say I would have left the menopause space completely because the menopause space no longer needed campaigners.
Mm.
You know, I would love to think that in 5 years' time, we had a system in place where all our trainee GPs were taught the same module about menopause. So they all had the same
It's
education.
staggering that doesn't happen to
I know.
me.
Um, and I would also like to see that for all our practice nurses as well, because I
Mm.
think very often women feel very comfortable talking to their practice nurses. They may have seen them in the past for other things. So I would like to see that. I would also like to see more recognition in the workplace of just how important it is to have menopause as part of your diversity inclusion, your health and well-being projects. You know, I often say to employers, you have to think about all the aspects of this, not just about how this is affecting the individual, but also how this affects your organization, what the ripple effects of that
Mm.
are. So it is a really common sense approach. I like common sense. And I would like for all young people in the UK to be taught again the same module so that they're all getting the same education, because it's very sort of, it seems very hit and miss at the moment. It seems all to be left to each individual school. So I
Mm.
would like there to be a resource that all teachers who are going to be tasked with teaching this have access to, so that all children get the same education, so that if somebody from Cardiff meets somebody from Glasgow or somebody from London and they get talking about this, it would be, oh, yeah, I remember that video presentation or whatever it might have been. Again, you know, for me, lovely, a lot of it comes down to common sense. And, you know, I often hear the phrase, well, it's just simply unworkable around anything to do with menopause, particularly with GP training. Things are only unworkable if you make them unworkable.
Yeah,
Nothing is unworkable if you really want to do it.
you prioritize it.
Absolutely that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But we can't afford not to. I mean, it's growing cohort of women kind of coming into this stage of life, and there's sort of the knock-on impacts of not addressing it. Surely if you want to make a business case for it,
mm,
even the impacts of not dealing with this as a health issue,
mm.
both for the physical and mental well-being, and as you say, the ripple effects within families, the ripple effects within business, because more and more women kind of going into that age bracket now at sort of middle senior management, if they're dropping out of the workforce, and all of the sort of the knock-on impact of that, it's too important not to prioritize.
And also for the NHS too.
Mm.
You know, if you think about the amount of women who report that they've seen their GP several times, or they've maybe referred to cardiology for palpitations or rheumatology for
Mm.
their achy joints,
It's expensive,
or
right, for the NHS.
worryingly for me, you know, psychiatry for mental health issues. And it's sort of all that is costing
Mm.
GP time, it's costing referrals, it's costing the NHS. The NHS could be saving a fortune
Mm.
if we used a common sense approach. But yeah, I go on a lot about common sense. It's not always prevalent in every discussion.
So one of the other things that I was interested in was the sort of the impact of the pandemic. Now, obviously, the campaign for the last 12 months, a lot has moved on. But do
Mm.
you feel, in some sense, that actually part of the sort of the impact of the pandemic is that we've gone backwards because people weren't able to sort of have those maybe as easily get to see their GP, or that they were
Mm.
more isolated? Are you seeing sort of maybe more of a sort of a mental health impact from the people that you're helping?
Yeah, I think, sort of, so obviously the pandemic itself has had a mental health impact. The isolation that people have felt, because for some, working from home has worked absolutely beautifully. For others, they've absolutely hated it. It's not been something that they've taken to. They can't wait to get back to their colleagues.
Mm,
And also for others, the isolation from family and friends. So that in itself has had an impact. But then the fact that actually, for many, getting a GP appointment has been difficult. And that's because GPs have been overwhelmed. And also the fact that people haven't been able to actually go and sit down with their doctor and speak to them. It's, sort of, a lot of it is not even done as video calls, it's done as telephone calls.
mm,
So that's been tricky for people. And then for those who do need a specialist referral, so for anybody who needs referring because perhaps of a complex medical history, so they need to be referred to an NHS menopause clinic, those waiting lists are huge,
mm,
because a lot of the doctors and gynecologists who run those clinics have been off doing other things as a result of the pandemic. So they've sort of been drafted back into other areas because of the pandemic. So that has made those waiting lists very long. And obviously, that then results in more anxiety for those who are waiting. And as I'm sure you and your listeners will be aware, we've seen this rise in cases of mental health generally in the population throughout the sort of 18 months of the pandemic. And of course, we know that mental health services are completely overwhelmed too. So, what we find is that, particularly with the group, there has been more discussion around mental health, not necessarily
mm.
related directly to menopause symptoms, but perhaps more, kind of socioeconomic reasons. The pandemic has had a huge impact on many people. Some people have been made redundant, etc. So it's a complex thing. And I
Yeah.
think we always have to remember that everybody's menopause experience is individual, and there can be many different factors that are affecting it. And stress is, kind of, stress can make a difference
Yeah, can
to your
compound the
hormone health.
physical
Yeah,
out symptoms.
absolutely.
And I do, I guess, speaking about physical symptoms, I think perhaps for people who aren't as aware of kind of menopause symptoms, the focus for them might be on the sort of the physical ones, because those are potentially the ones that are better known, or they're sort of, they are talked about in like a documentary, or a sort of a sitcom where somebody will be making fun of the hot flushes or whatever.
Mm.
But actually, as you yourself experienced, a lot of time it is the more sort of mental health symptoms that can be the most debilitating.
So, when we're talking about anxiety, I think it's really important to remember that there are some of the physical symptoms that can make people feel more anxious and
Mm,
affect their mental health. So, if you're experiencing symptoms that you find embarrassing in a public situation, that can raise anxiety. But also the symptoms we never talk about, the really taboo ones, what we call the genitourinary symptoms, things like increased urinary frequency or urgency, increased urinary tract infections, perhaps the vaginal or vulval symptoms. They can have a huge impact, because if they are debilitating and if they're all you can think about,
Mm.
actually you can't focus on anything else. So I've worked with several women over the years who have actually left employment because they just simply cannot focus, or they can't sit down
And they don't
for
feel that
long
they can raise
periods.
it within the workplace.
Exactly.
It's just too difficult.
Exactly that. Exactly
Mm.
that. They can't raise it because it's just too embarrassing for them personally. That wouldn't be the situation for everybody, but for them
Mm.
personally. And of course, if you're in discomfort all the time, and sadly, not everybody is aware that those genitourinary symptoms can even be related to perimenopause and the reduction in estrogen, then that can have a significant effect on your mental health. So, as I said, it's very individual and really can be quite complex. So, it's really important. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important that people have time to be able to talk about what they're experiencing, because it can also be really emotional,
Mm. Yeah, it's not something
and
you can suddenly spew out in kind of 5 minutes to be like, "And another thing," in your GP's office. Like you say, people need that kind of support. They need to
yeah,
feel like they've got a safe space to talk about these things that are
exactly.
sometimes incredibly difficult to talk about, but, that they desperately need some help with.
Exactly that. And, as I said, the reason that I was driven to do it in the first place is because I would really have liked the opportunity to do that.
Mm,
But when I looked for it, it wasn't there. And the other thing that is becoming, sort of a bigger and bigger issue is that when people can't get the help and support they need from their local GP, and there are some great GPs who have updated their knowledge, and it's really encouraging to hear when people are having a good experience,
mm,
but many don't. And so consequently, they feel that they're left with no option than to go the private healthcare route. And of course, that's fine if that's your choice and you can afford it, but it can be very expensive.
yeah, it's out
So
of reach for I would say most
exact
people.
exactly that. And that's another reason why we wanted to offer what we hope is a much more affordable alternative. We can't prescribe in the same way that a GP can prescribe, but we can talk through all the options. We can write that introductory letter. And I would say, sort of 90+% time, we have very positive feedback, not just from the women who have experienced those sessions, but actually from GPs too, saying, thank you
Mm.
very much. That was really helpful. That really helped me to help my patient. So that's really encouraging too.
It's fantastic. And I should say as well that on your menopause support website, there is an absolute wealth of resources. I'll definitely pop a link into the show notes. And if people want to find your Facebook support group, which is also wonderful, that's also, I think if they probably do a quick search on Facebook under menopause support, that should
Yeah,
pop
there's
up.
also a link to that on the
There
website.
is. Wonderful. Diane, thank you very, very much indeed for your time today. It's
Pleasure.
an absolute joy to meet you. And I'm sure on behalf of women and girls everywhere, a huge heartfelt thanks for, being that quiet voice that got louder and louder and louder and didn't give up.
Lovely. Thank you very much, lovely. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.